Part 1. A shot of whiskey was safer than a sip of water. They say a cowboy could ride for 3 days on a half-dead horse, chewing jerky, spitting dust, and cursing the sky. But take a sip from the wrong creek, and he'd be dead by sundown. In the Wild West, the biggest killer wasn't a bullet, a snake, or a bandit. It was water. Not the lack of it, though droughts were real and deadly, but the water itself. Ponds, rivers, even seemingly clear springs were teeming with diseases no cowboy could pronounce. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid, invisible killers that hid in the very thing you needed most. You'd think a man covered in trail dust, horse sweat, and cow dung would crave a good, clean drink. But there was no such thing. Clear didn't mean safe. In fact, the clearer the water, the more suspicious a cowboy became. So what did they drink? Whiskey, not because they were drunks, though many were, but because it was the only thing that didn't kill you, not immediately. Anyway, water could kill you faster than a bullet. Imagine riding into a new town. After weeks on the trail, your lips are cracked, your mouth is full of dust, your throat feels like it's been scraped with sandpaper. You see a well, you rush toward it. The townsfolk, they just watch, because they know what you don't. Last week, 2 kids died after drinking from that same well, a dead possum felon. No one cleaned it out. They just threw some dirt on top and kept drawing buckets. Cowboys learned early. You drink local water, you roll the dice. That's why even the greenest ranch hand carried a flask. Whiskey wasn't a luxury. It was liquid insurance. If it burned going down, it meant it was killing the germs. Probably whiskey for breakfast, lunch, and blood loss. In the absence of germ theory, cowboys followed simpler logic. If the water makes you puke and whiskey doesn't, drink the whiskey. So they did. Sunrise, swig of vodka to wash out the taste of last night's tobacco. Midday, sip while you mend a fence or shoot at rattlers. Nightfall, enough shots to forget your blisters, the thunderstorm rolling in, and the lice in your blanket. It wasn't just for fun. Whiskey had a job. It numbed the pain when you dislocated a shoulder or got kicked by a mule. It disinfected wounds when the doc was 100 miles away. It even stood in for toothpaste, mouthwash, and on especially bad days, BATHWATER. Cowboys would gargle it, spit it, pour it over bullet holes, and then drink what was left. It burned. But burning meant it worked. What was actually in that whiskey? The term whiskey was generous. Out west, most of it wasn't aged in barrels. It wasn't even distilled in real stills. A lot of it came in big glass jugs with no labels and no questions asked. Some batches were flavored with tobacco juice, turpentine, or rattlesnake heads for kick. Others were so potent they could strip paint off a wagon wheel. And yet, cowboys drank it gladly, because the alternative was a gut full of river slime and a funeral with no coffin. Even the horses knew better. There's an old story about a cowboy named Buckshot Bill who refused to drink anything but creek water. Said whiskey made his aim wobbly. That was until he spent 3 days curled up in a ditch, leaking from both ends and begging for someone to shoot him. By the time he crawled into a saloon and took his first sip of whiskey, he wasn't just converted, he was reborn. Some claimed even the horses preferred whiskey to stagnant pond water. Ranchers would mix a shot into a bucket just to get the animals to drink in the dry months. Was it true? Probably not. But in the West, if a story made you laugh and wince at the same time, it was good enough. Closing hook to next part. But the real problem wasn't just what the whiskey replaced. It was what it caused: fistfights, accidental shootings, gambling losses, and a very specific type of cowboy swagger that smelled like sweat and fire. In the next part, we'll dive into the messy, dangerous, and sometimes hilarious side effects of keeping your bloodstream 40% proof. Because out here, being sober might make you clean, but it sure didn't make you safe. Part 2. Whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was a personality. If you ever walked into a frontier saloon and didn't hear shouting, laughing, or the unmistakable crack of knuckles against jaw, check again. You might be in a funeral parlor. Whiskey didn't just warm your belly, it set your fists on fire. A cowboy with a flask wasn't just thirsty. He was loaded in more ways than one. And when your bloodstream is half rotgut and half revenge, things get theatrical. Liquid courage, Liquid stupiditith same whiskey. That kept you from dying of cholera also convinced you it was a good idea to challenge a 6-foot ranch boss to arm wrestling, or call the sheriff shorty, or try to lasso a rattlesnake for fun. Cowboys didn't drink for relaxation. They drank to blur the edges of a brutal world. The saddle sores, the sunstroke, the loneliness, but in blurring the world, they also blurred their judgment. That's why most saloons kept spare chairs, not for guests, but for smashing over someone's back when the poker game got heated. And the piano player, he didn't stop when the brawl started. He just changed tempo. Saloon rules were simple: no guns, no spitting, no sobriety. Most frontier towns had one bar, 2 rules, and no floor that didn't smell like blood, beer, and someone's. Lunch, you walk in, holster your gun. You talk back, get ready to duck. You stay sober, nobody trusts you. Being drunk was the norm. Staying sharp, alert, and clean-shaven made folks suspicious. Maybe you were a Pinkerton, maybe a preacher, maybe worse, an accountant. In a world of muddy boots and itchy trousers, whiskey was a handshake, a drink shared between men who might fight or might become blood brothers, often both, on the same night. Whiskey and gunpowder don't mix, but they did anyway. One cowboy's idea of fun after 3 drinks: shooting flies off a wall with live ammo. Another's shooting his own hat, just to prove how fast he could draw. Accidental discharges were so common that some towns banned loaded guns in saloons, but not outside, where it was just as dangerous, but less likely to break the mirror behind the bar. There's a famous case in Arizona where 2 cowboys started arguing over whose whiskey tasted better. By dawn, one had a black eye, the other had a new nickname, One-Leg Jim, and the bartender had a fresh bullet hole in his ceiling. They all came back the next night. Together, bar fights were part of the economy. You might think constant fighting was bad for business, but not in the West. Saloon keepers expected broken chairs and cracked ribs. It meant the whiskey was working. It meant men were staying, drinking, losing money at cards, and paying again for the damages. Some even kept fight stools, cheap, lightweight chairs specifically designed to break dramatically, not to save lives, just to make the chaos look good. And don't forget the spit bucket by the piano, full to the brim. You didn't want to fall into that during a scuffle, but someone always did. Drunk, dirty, and proud of it. Cowboys didn't try to hide their condition. They bragged about it. I ain't sober since Abilene, one might say, proudly staggering toward the hitching post. Don't trust a man who don't drink, another would mutter after throwing up behind the outhouse. Alcohol wasn't a vice. It was a companion, a tool, a shield against pain, boredom, heartbreak, and whatever was growing inside that infected bullet wound. It was also a liability. Closing hook to next part, because while whiskey helped a cowboy forget the pain, it didn't fix the infections, broken bones, or missing teeth. In the next part, we'll see what happened after the hangover, when your guts twisted, your liver begged for mercy, and the nearest doctor was a 3-day ride away, if he even existed. And if not, well, there was always more whiskey. Part 3. The morning after was never quiet on the frontier. In towns where the whiskey ran cheap and fast, the sunrise came with groans, bruises, and the smell of stale alcohol mixing with manure in the street. Cowboys who'd been kings of the saloon the night before now clutched their heads, their stomachs, or the side of the building as they stumbled toward consciousness. But there was no time for regret. Cattle didn't care about hangovers, neither did the sun. So they did what they always did. They reached for more whiskey. It wasn't about celebration anymore. Now it was medicine. You didn't go to a doctor. You went to the bottle. Because for most cowboys, there was no doctor to go to. The frontier was hundreds of miles wide, and most towns didn't have a real physician. If they did, he was probably also the barber, the undertaker, and the mayor. And chances were, he treated wounds with whiskey. So the bottle stayed on the table. Always. Got a toothache? Swish whiskey. Split your lip in a brawl? Pour whiskey on it. Snake bite? Whiskey and prayer. And if something hurt deep inside, in the gut, in the chest, in places you didn't understand, well, then you just drank until it either stopped hurting or you passed out trying. Whiskey didn't fix anything, but it dulled the scream. Out on the trail, there were no painkillers, no antiseptics, no clean bandages. You stitched your own leg shut after a barbed wire cut. You dug out your own bullet, and then you poured liquor on it to keep it from going black. Most times it didn't work, but you did it anyway. Cowboys weren't fearless, they were desperate, and desperate men drank. There's a story out of Dodge City about a cowboy who broke 3 ribs after falling off his horse while drunk. His friends didn't send for help. They propped him against a hay bale, handed him a bottle, and played cards until he passed out. He survived, mostly because he was too drunk to feel the pain, or maybe he just forgot it ever happened. In the West, you didn't get better. You got tougher, or you didn't get up at all. And while whiskey took the edge off, it took something else with it: your balance, your memory, your chances of living past 40. There were men who couldn't hold a coffee cup without shaking. Not from fear, from drink. Men who forgot what town they were in, what year it was, or where they buried their brother, and yet they kept drinking. Because the alternative wasn't sobriety, it was remembering. The frontier wasn't kind to quiet minds. It fed on grief, loneliness, guilt, and rage. And if you couldn't bury those feelings 6 feet under, you drowned them in liquor. By the time some cowboys hit their 30s, they looked twice that. Their teeth were gone, their hands were twisted, and their eyes had that tired, glossy stare. The kind you only get after burying too many friends and watching the land take more than it ever gave back. And still, at the end of the day, with cracked knuckles and sunburned skin, they'd sit by the fire, take out the flask, and drink, because it was the one thing they could count on to be there, even if it was slowly killing them. Next, we'll head to the rail camps, the cattle drives, and the outlaw hideouts where whiskey wasn't just survival, but currency, bribe, and weapon, and where men would trade their boots, their horse, or their soul for just one more bottle. Part 4. Out on the cattle drives and in the rail camps, whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was a language. A bottle could settle a debt, smooth over an insult, buy silence, or start a war. It passed between rough hands like currency, clinking in saddlebags and wagon crates, stashed in boots and buried in dry creek beds for emergencies. Men fought for it. Men killed for it. And more often than not, men drank it alone, staring into a fire, listening to coyotes cry somewhere in the dark. There were no bartenders out here, no bar stools, just dirt, cold beans, and the slow weight of miles, and whiskey. On the trail, it did double duty. In the morning, it woke you up. At night, it knocked you out. In between, it numbed your saddle sores and washed the dust from your teeth. Cowboys mixed it with whatever they had: coffee, river water, even molasses if they got lucky. Some flavored it with bark, pepper, or gunpowder. No one cared about taste. They cared about effect. It wasn't about pleasure, it was about distance. Distance from the screams of a trampled steer. Distance from the fever that took your bunkmate. Distance from the smell of your own rotting boots. Outlaw camps took it further. For them, whiskey was armor. You couldn't hesitate when you were robbing a train or ambushing a wagon. So you got just drunk enough to stop caring. There are stories of bandits riding straight into gunfire, mouths full of liquor and eyes burning. Not because they were brave, because they were broken. And when the job was done, they'd toast the dead, pour some on the ground, and pass out under the stars with their revolvers still in hand. Railroad workers weren't much different. Tents pitched in mud, backs breaking. From sunup to sundown, fights over pay, over women, over nothing at all. And always, a bottle passed between hands when the shift ended. The companies tried to ban alcohol, sent preachers to the camps, set up temperance tents. No use. One foreman said it best: you can't ask a man to swing iron 10 hours a day and then give him tea. They'd sneak it in barrels marked machine oil, in crates labeled dried beans. One teamster even hid 100 bottles inside a coffin, because on the frontier, sobriety wasn't just rare, it was suspicious. A man who didn't drink was hiding something. Or worse, he thought he was better than the rest. Whiskey was the equalizer. Rich or poor, outlaw or sheriff, drover or gambler, everyone bled the same when they drank too much. Everyone told the same wild stories, laughed the same loud laugh, made the same stupid bets. And when the bottle ran dry, they all felt the same emptiness in their gut. That silence, that was the part they feared most, because the bottle kept more than germs away. It kept the truth quiet, the truth that the West was cruel, that it didn't care if you were strong or clever or kind, that no matter how many miles you rode, how many hands you shook, or how many fights you won, you'd still end up under the same dry dirt as the cowhand no one. Remember. So you drank, to stay warm, to stay numb, to stay human. And maybe, just maybe, to forget that one day the bottle would outlive you, because in the Wild West, the only thing that lasted longer than a cowboy was the taste of whiskey on a dusty trail.